Tips analysis. I hope you're feeling positive because this is the Introverted Positron, and welcome back to another episode of Tips Analysis. Today I want to talk about something that can be considered to be quite controversial, and that is the idea of loot boxes and DLC. Now, in terms of my own history with this idea, I've been on both sides at one point or another. I was at a point where I didn't like the idea of DLC, the whole idea of paying for a game again, kind of in my mind was just like, it didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense for me to be paying for anything outside of the game I got, and that's because I'd never really experienced it at that point. I was always with Nintendo consoles, and I was young, and I didn't really understand what it was until later on. And now that I do, for the most part, I actually have no problem with DLC in its concept. So when it comes to the concept of DLC, I know that everybody probably knows this, but DLC is obviously stands for downloadable content, and most of the time this DLC is you have to pay for it. So essentially, it's additional expansions and content on your game that kind of expands the overall experience you already had. Now, as I said, I initially understood this concept. I understood that you had to pay for it, I understood there was extra content for the game, I just didn't understand why you had to pay for it. But looking ahead and understanding more about game development now, I understand that they had to put months past the time that they were originally supposed to get this content out. Whether it's fairly priced is a different issue, but the fact of the matter is I understand why it's worth it now, because being able to have a game come out and be fully made, and that's the important part about good DLC, is that the game has to feel complete without the DLC itself, that it can actually kind of expand upon the experience. And it allows the developers to work on something that they have loved working on even more and put more work into it. And that's a cool concept. I like the idea of being able to get more on a game that I bought, even if I have to pay a little bit extra to get it. That's not a bad thing in my mind. Now, that's kind of the thing when it comes to good versus bad DLC, is that bad DLC is one that feels like it should have been in the original game. The game feels like it was only complete once it was added. Something like, I don't think this is really bad DLC, but for instance, the Master Trials in Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword Trials, there's something that I think should have been the original game, because it feels very much like the sword itself feels very weak before that, weaker than it should in a lot of senses, because it's the Master Sword. So having the opportunity to power it up just makes sense, and it makes the whole situation make a lot more sense. So being able to do that, it was a good idea. It was a good idea to have it. I just wish it was in the original game as well. But that's a minor case, because Breath of the Wild is such a huge game as it is, and already feels complete. So that doesn't really count, but it's just an example of one where I feel like it should have been in the original game. Now, there are better examples, I think, and I won't get into this too much, but stuff like, but in particular stuff like what EA does with Battlefront and stuff like that, where they basically sell you an expansion pass and then give you a very bare bones experience. So it's like you pay a full price for the bare bones experience and you have to pay even more for everything else. That's the kind of thing that I don't like. And Nintendo has done that with some things. I think Smash Bros. And Fire Emblem have lots of content where it feels like you had to pay for it to be able to do better in the game, because they give you a lot of grinding experience and stuff like that when it comes to Fire Emblem. And Smash Bros. Had a lot of characters that were good, and some of which felt like they should have been in the original game. Players like Mewtwo and Roy, I feel like really just should have been in the original Smash Bros. 4. But at the same time, I get that it takes time to work on characters and that they had trouble getting it out as it was. But at the same time, it feels like those kinds of characters should have been there. Cloud, Bayonetta, those kinds of things make sense. But anyway, that's just my opinion on that. But yeah, so there's definitely versions of both good and bad DLC. And it's important to kind of verify that. Like, people were angry when it was announced that Breath of the Wild was going to get DLC because they didn't like the idea. The issue is that it was announced before the game even released. If they'd waited like a month afterwards, people would have been fine with it, I think. But ultimately, it's, you know, it is what it is. It's not a bad thing because they didn't remove content from the game itself to put it back in. They were like, we want to continue working on this project that we've been working on for a very long time now, and do something extra for another year so that we can give more to the people who have been waiting for this, and because they also want to make money. Don't get me wrong, I realize it's also to make money, and it makes sense. You know what? That's I don't think that's a bad way of looking at it. As long as the game is complete, and as long as it feels that way, I have no problems with DLC. Now, loot boxes, that's a completely different issue, because what loot boxes mostly are is they are essentially often paid for in games and basically are opened up to give you loot for the game. In the case of the controversy with Battlefront 2, for instance, they were actually like new characters and weapons that actually affected gameplay, and that is an awful way of going about it. Now, the way I don't care about it, and I mean I really don't care about it, is when they put aesthetics into it. Like with Overwatch, for instance, they every time you go up a level, you get a box. You can also buy boxes, but it gives you a costume for one of the heroes in the game, and that's okay. I don't care about it at all. I'm not somebody who likes to spend money on those things. I don't care about aesthetics in games almost at all. I enjoy the gameplay regardless. I get that having a costume can make things fresh. You might like this particular look on a character, but I'm also fine with unlocking that without buying anything. So when it comes to loot boxes, my personal opinion on it is as long as it doesn't affect gameplay, I think it's pretty harmless, but I don't really get them. I understand that they bring in more money, and I understand that games are such an expensive market that it makes sense to kind of push these kinds of things, but I don't really get it. To that extent, because that's what it is. And again, it's the whole thing where there's like okay versions in the case of loot boxes. I don't care about them, and then there's the bad version. I guess if you have unpaid loot boxes, it doesn't really count. We're talking about paid content here, but anything that affects gameplay that you have to pay for a random chance of winning, no, I'm not for it. I don't like that at all, because then you end up with the random chance that you're just never going to get it, and you had to pay for it to even get a chance. In fact, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I like the fact that it's not paid for because they could have done it. It would have been really, really easy to add that in as a pay system. You had to buy core crystals or find them in the game or grind for them, and obviously it'd be faster to pay for them. But I'm glad they didn't do that. Because I enjoy the blade system the way it does. It gives you a fresh experience every single time. There's lots of rare blades to kind of explore and to be interested in, invested in, and those kinds of things, but you don't have to pay for it. Whereas, again, Battlefront 2 is the first thing that comes to mind. You had to pay for it. I know that they removed that system, but still, it gained the controversy it did because of the way it worked in a multiplayer environment of all things. A place where people compete with each other, they had to pay for the content. And that wasn't smart, as EA thankfully did figure out. But anyway, I'm not going to rant on that because that's not what I'm here to do. The point is loot boxes can be interesting, I guess. I haven't found any version of it where I'm interested in the content and what loot boxes are, but yeah, not that bad. I just, again, think that they should never have any effect on the gameplay itself, unless it's, of course, a free-to-play game. But that's a whole other issue for a whole other day. So yeah, that's my thoughts on loot boxes and on DLC in general. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps with the channel, and it's always appreciated. I'm going to leave some links here so you can go check out some other stuff on my channel, or you can always just search the channel. There's lots of stuff for people, playlists, and all that stuff. And so on that note, thank you again, have a great day, and remember to keep positive.